had served the crown faithfully for 20 years. At least Tywin was able to leave the job with his life and fortunes intact. Subsequent hands of King Aerys weren't so fortunate. Then the Targaryens went too far. The Crown Prince Rhaegar abducted Lyanna Stark, daughter of Rickard Stark, the Lord of Winterfell. She was my betrothed. She was my beloved. Beautiful and spirited woman, and I loved her more than life itself. Rhaegar went south with Lyanna, hiding her away in Dorne. What harm he inflicted on the poor girl, the gods only know. Brandon Stark, Lyanna's eldest brother, was outraged. He rode to King's Landing to confront the king and demand his sister's safe return. Instead, Aerys had him executed, his father, Rickard Stark, as well. There wasn't much left to discuss after that. Aerys feared their loved ones would seek revenge for what he did. He was right to be afraid. Aerys wasted no time in calling for the heads of Brandon's younger brother, my friend Eddard Stark. And my head too, of course. I'm sorry he didn't come looking for it himself. Alongside Jon Arryn of the Vale, the man who fostered Ned and I as children, Baratheons, Starks, and Tullys all called their banners. Once our rebellion began, the Mad King's days were numbered.
As word of King Aerys' erratic and troubling behavior spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms, Lord Rickard Stark continued to serve his king faithfully as Warden of the North. The proud father of 4 children, his daughter Lyanna, was engaged to Robert Baratheon, the young lord of Storm's End. Centuries of peace between the North and the Iron Throne ended the day Rhaegar Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, abducted Lyanna. Enraged, Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing, demanding the release of his sister and the death of Rhaegar. Aerys arrested him for treason and called his father to come to the capital to ransom him. When Lord Rickard complied, Aerys, now utterly mad, arrested him for treason as well. Lord Rickard demanded a trial by combat. Aerys declared fire the champion of House Targaryen, and had Lord Rickard suspended from the rafters of the throne room while pyromancers lit a blaze beneath him. As he burned, Brandon was brought into the throne room. A leather cord attached to a strangulation device was wrapped around his neck. Aerys told Brandon his father was a dead man, but there was a chance to save him. A long sword was placed on the floor just out of Brandon's reach, and the more he struggled to reach it, the more the cord tightened around his throat. Brandon Stark strangled himself, trying to free his father, who was roasted alive in his own armor. The entire court stood and watched this atrocity take place. Sir Jaime Lannister and the Kingsguard among them. The Mad King was reported to have laughed hysterically as these 2 noble men were tortured and brutally killed before him. Seeking to rid the world of all his supposed enemies, Aerys called for the head of Rickard's younger son, Eddard Stark, and Lyanna's betrothed, Robert Baratheon. He sent word to Lord Jon Arryn, who had fostered both young men of the Eyrie, to apprehend them. Instead, Lord Arryn joined houses Stark and Baratheon in rebellion.
Artemis.
Robert vowed to kill Rhaegar Targaryen and get his beloved Lyanna back.
As Aerys Targaryen's behavior grew more and more erratic, the task of ruling the Seven Kingdoms fell to me, Tywin Lannister. I had served Aerys for nearly 20 years, and as a result, the realm had prospered. The royal coffers were full, the land was at peace. But Aerys grew increasingly hostile, jealous of the success many credited to me. foreign influence unnerved him. The captain of my personal guard, Sir Ellen Payne, was once overheard making offhand comments regarding who was the true ruler of Westeros. When the king was given this information, he had Ellen Payne's tongue ripped out with hot pincers. It was my desire to unite the houses of Lannister and Targaryen through marriage. My daughter Cersei would marry Aerys' eldest son, Prince Rhaegar. Such a union made perfect sense for all parties. However, Aerys' senses had begun to leave him quite some time earlier. Instead of uniting the royal family with its most loyal and powerful ally, Aerys chose instead to insult my family, indicating that such a match was beneath Rhaegar. Instead, he chose Elia Martell of Dorne to be Rhaegar's wife. As if to rub salt in my wounds, Aerys appointed Jaime, my son, to the King's Guard. The King's Guard may be an honor to lesser families than ours, but it is a lifetime appointment that forces him to renounce all family holdings. This creates a difficulty in naming an heir to Casterly Rock. But Aerys knew all that. I had grown tired of the king's constant provocation. Thus, I resigned my post as Aerys' hand and returned to Casterly Rock with my considerable forces. When Robert Baratheon rebelled against the throne, Aerys grew fearful that I would join with Robert's forces and rise against him. He thought himself clever and kept Jaime very close, as if warning me. He sunk deeper and deeper into delusion, paranoia, and violence. I've heard it said he became obsessed with wildfire, a substance which once lived not yet in him. Convinced he had enemies all around him, he wouldn't allow blades in his presence, save for those of his king's guard. Alas, that proved to be untrue.
Rebellion. The crimes of House Targaryen were too heinous to go unanswered. The noble houses of Baratheon, Stark, and Arryn united to oppose and overthrow the line of the first Dragon King. While Ned Stark and Arryn secured an alliance with the Tullys of Riverrun, I called the banners of Storm's End and rode out in force against the Mad King and his minions. Gods, those were some battles. Our first victory occurred at Summerhall, where I faced off against an army of dragon loyalists and won 3 battles in a single day. 3 in one day. 7 hells, that was a glorious day. We tried to take Ashford Castle in the Reach, but the Tyrells beat us back. We had to regroup. My army was pursued north by Aerys' army and took refuge in the Stony Sept in the Riverlands. When the Targaryen army entered the town, the Sept bells tolled, a signal to the townspeople of the battle that was to come. As the Targaryens searched from house to house for me, the combined forces of Ned Stark and the Tullys swept into the city. Gods, what a day that was. It's now known as the Battle of the Bells. We overwhelmed the Mad King's forces and sent them scampering back to King's Landing. Aerys' son, Rhaegar, who started the whole damn thing, finally emerged from hiding in the south and assembled his own army to face us. As for the Mad King, he must have been pissing himself. The battle that would decide the fate of the 7 kingdoms occurred at the crossing of the Green Fork of the Trident River. Rhaegar commanded the royal host, which was some 40,000 strong. My forces were outnumbered by nearly 5,000 men. That didn't matter. They were fresh, but we were battling hard and had justice on our side. As the battle raged around us, I faced off with Rhaegar, the stag and the dragon right there in the ford of the river. I fought with the fury of 10 men, raining blow after blow upon that vile prince before burying my warhammer in his chest. I hit him so hard the rubies on his armor broke free, flinging them into the stream. They call it the Ruby Ford now. With that scum Rhaegar dead and the royal army shattered, our next move was to make for King's Landing. But I'd sustained a few wounds in the battle and was unable to ride. I sent Ned Stark to the capital to face the Mad King and make him pay for his crimes.
The Targaryens, blood of the dragon, and the last of old Valyria, were loved by their subjects, and admired far and wide as the greatest dynasty in the history of the Western world. But the peace and prosperity of nearly 3 centuries of Targaryen rule was shattered by the usurper, Robert Baratheon, and his band of traitors. House Baratheon owed its very existence to the Targaryens. Was it not Aegon the Dragon himself who elevated the bastard Orys Baratheon in the War of Conquest? And what of the Starks, the Lannisters, the Aarons of the Vale? All had been spared and allowed to keep their lands when Aegon could easily have wiped them out.
Your middle tower is
Centuries
under attack.
later, the usurper and his lackeys repaid Aegon's benevolence with treachery. There are some who dare to
Always
claim
be
Robert
scared.
and his allies had reason to rebel. They say the Crown Prince stole the usurper's lady love. They say my father, King Aerys, murdered Rickard Stark and his son without just cause. Whether these charges are true or not, it doesn't matter. The dragon answers to no one. Aerys' good name has been besmirched in the years. He's been called a dangerous madman, a monster, a tyrant that brought his tragic end upon himself. Lies! My father was a victim of weaklings in his council, lackwits who failed him in his hour of need and let the rebellion spin out of control. But it was not enough. The royal army. It was there the valiant Rhaegar met Robert in single combat, but the gods betrayed him, and he perished by the usurper's hand. As the field of the trident seemed to herald the end of the Dragon Kings.
This gets to the point.
When word reached the capital of my brother Rhaegar's death, my father Aerys moved to protect me, as I was the surviving heir to the throne. He sent me to the island fortress of Dragonstone, along with my mother, Queen Rhaela, who was great with child. But as my father, my king, Aerys Targaryen, prepared to defend his throne to the bitter end, little did he know of the horrors and betrayals that awaited him.
My brother Robert Baratheon had raised the banners of Storm's End, our ancestral castle, against the mad King Aerys. Jon Arryn of the Vale, Eddard Stark of the North stood with him, and Hoster Tully of the Riverlands was joined. But their lands were far from ours, and separated by the combined strength of the West, the Reach, and King's Landing itself. Even Robert's own lords were there. It was the hardest choice I've ever made. My brother or my king. Blood or honor. Aerys ruled by right of all the laws in Westeros. Everyone knew the price of defiance, but there are deeper, older laws. The younger brother bows before the elder. I followed Robert. Early in the war, Mace Tyrell's indecisive victory at Ashford cut Robert off from Storm's End. Instead of pursuing Robert and risking his record, Mace Tyrell turned east and laid siege to our home. His vast army and navy encircled us and prevented any resupply by land or sea. If a wagon tried to reach us, it would burn. If the ship tried to land, it was sunk. We were locked in Storm's End to starve, but Robert commanded me to hold the castle no matter the cost. He could ill afford to lose his ancient seat, which had never fallen. While Robert smashed Rhaegar on the Trident, my men ate the dogs, because the horses had already been devoured. While the Lannisters sacked King's Landing, we ate the rats. If the smuggler Davos had not slipped through the Tyrell's cave with his own, we'd have eaten our own dead. But I held the castle until Lord Eddard remembered us and marched to lift the siege. The Tyrells didn't even go to fight. And Robert threw a feast to celebrate Lord Eddard's victory. I was sent to the Royal Island stronghold of Dragonstone to deal with Viserys and Daenerys, the last surviving Targaryen children. Before I arrived, however, they escaped.
Along with my mother, Queen Rhaela, who was great with child. But as my father, my king, Aerys Targaryen, prepared to defend his throne to the bitter end, little did he know of the horrors and betrayals that awaited him.
My brother Robert Baratheon had raised the banners of Storm's End, our ancestral castle, against the mad King Aerys. Jon Arryn of the Vale and Eddard Stark of the North stood with him, and Hoster Tully of the Riverlands would join. But their lands were far from ours, and separated by the combined strength of the West, the Reach, and King's Landing itself, even Robert's own lord. It was the hardest choice I've ever made, my brother or my king, blood or honor. Aerys ruled by right of all the lords in Westeros. Everyone knew the price of defiance, but there are deeper, older. The younger brother bows before the elder. I followed Robert. Early in the war, Mace Tyrell's indecisive victory at Ashford cut Robert off from Storm's End. Instead of pursuing Robert and risking his record, Mace Tyrell turned east and laid siege to our home.
Always be
His
prepared.
vast army and navy encircled us and prevented any resupply by land or sea. If a wagon tried to reach us, it was burned. If a ship tried to land, it was sunk. We were locked in Storm's End to starve, but Robert commanded me to hold the castle no matter the cost. He could ill afford to lose his ancient seat, which had never fallen. While Robert smashed Rhaegar on the Trident, my men ate the dogs, because the horses had already been devoured. While the Lannisters sacked King's Landing, we ate the rats. If the smuggler Davos had not slipped through the Tyrell blockade with his enemies, we'd have eaten our own dead. But I held the castle until Lord Eddard remembered us and marched to lift the siege. The Tyrells didn't put up a fight, and Robert threw a feast to celebrate Lord Eddard's victory. I was sent to the Royal Island stronghold of Dragonstone to deal with Viserys and Daenerys, the last surviving Targaryen children. Before I arrived, however, they escaped across the narrow sea. Robert was saved. He stripped me of Storm's End and gave it to that prancing fool Renly, my younger brother. I could keep Dragonstone. Now Robert is dead, and a bastard pretender soiled my throne while the realm full of schemes and traitors. But the rightful king is coming for them all, and I will not stop until I have scoured this land clean of abomination. The Baratheons say, ours is the fury. I will show them. Fury burns.
In King's Landing, if you leave the Red Keep unattended, you may find yourself in the Flea Bottom. In such a cesspool, with house and road at its glorious start. I got out as soon as I could, finding work on a smuggler's ship. Soon, every port on the narrow sea had a bounty on me, which they would collect if I didn't pay a percentage to the right people who were picking the right tides. You know how to tell a good smuggler? When you talk to one, there's a head that talks back. I was very good. Davos the Flea Bottom had run with orphans and beggars, but Davos the Smuggler was received by merchants and lords when nobody would catch them. Oddly, the only honest work came from pirates, like the notorious, bloodthirsty Salador Sam, an old friend. All he ever wanted was someone to buy his cargo quickly before the tide left, and sell it without telling where I got it. In time, I saved enough to buy a small plot of land and found a woman who was kind enough to overlook my trade. She gave me a son, Mathis. And we dreamt of the traitor's circle around the Jade Sea, just one trip, and I could settle us and our family for life. Then some Storm Lord revolted against the Iron Throne. Wars are not as good for smugglers as you'd think. Every harbour fills with guards and inspectors, and the seas filled with blockades and pirates paid by each side to prey on the other. Though I had no love for the Mad King, I'd grown up around the power of King's Landing. I figured this Robert Baratheon and the same as the other rebels burned to ash, but he didn't. The North, the Riverlands and the Vale joined him, and in the taverns people drank Robert's health openly. Brave fools, I thought, but I had a family who'd be left in the cold if I lost my head. When Mace Tyrell marched on Robert's home of Storm's End, I spied the end of the rebellion. The castle was garrisoned by Robert's younger brother Stannis and the Shield, and would not hold out for long. When it fell, Robert wouldn't cross, and his support flew away. This painful experience. Months later, Stannis was still holding the castle. Nobody came, but on voyages, I had seen what famine does, and I thought of all those men in Storm's End who would die unmourned and forgotten. No better than flea-bottom orphans. I told my wife and myself that I'd get a high price for the onions and salt beef. In truth, I knew I'd be captured by the Tyrell galleys or drowned, but I was too stubborn. Later that night, in the dark, in a tiny boat with a black sail, I cursed myself in the moonlight as I waited for the tide to turn. When it did, the wind beat the sail so hard I ripped it down, fearing the Tyrell ships would hear. Luckily, they'd grown lax. With muffled oars alone, I steered my cargo through the treacherous currents and snarls of rock that gave shipwreck a bay at sea. The waves finally carried me, soaked and near blind from sea water, through the mouth of the cavern beneath the castle. Then, Stannis Baratheon arrived. The siege had left him gaunt, but not weak, never weak. He greeted me and accepted my onions with cool courtesy, betraying no emotion, even as all wept. He doled out the food to his wife and each of his men before he ate himself, a portion no larger than any other. When he finally thanked me, I could see his mind had already returned to the castle's defense. His duty. After Aerys fell and Lord Stark lifted the siege, Stannis summoned me. For my salvation as Storm's End, I was to be granted a knighthood, a keep of my own, and my son taken into Stannis' personal service. Davos of Flea Bottom had become Sir Davos of House Seaworth, and his son would serve the king's own brother. But for my previous crimes as a smuggler, I was to have the fingertips of one hand taken off above the highest joint. Stannis held that I had flouted the laws of the land for years, and a good act does not wash out the bad. In one fell swoop, in 5, Stannis gave my son a future and my family a name that I could never have imagined, nor earned on my own. I still keep the finger bones in a bag around my neck, to remind me what I was and what I owed to Stannis. And during my many years as a smuggler, I visited many ports, taverns and back alleys. I saw many things in this world, but never justice.
An enemy has been slain.
In the dawn age of Westeros, before the coming of man and the raising of castles and cities, there were only the children of the forest. Little is known of them now, but it is said they were small in stature, dark and beautiful, and no taller than children when grown to manhood. They lived in the depths of the forests and hidden villages, crannots and caves. They hunted with weirwood bows and armed themselves with blades of obsidian. Their wise men were called green seers and were possessed of a powerful magic. They worshipped nameless, faceless gods of the forest, stream and stone. According to legend, as they carved faces in the great mud traps of the majestic werewolves, their deep-cut eyes were red with sap and ever watching. 12,000 years ago, the first men came from the eastern continent, crossing a land bridge called the Arm of Dawn. Riding their great horses and wielding weapons of bronze, they cut down the children's forests and weirwoods. A terrible war raged between the children and the first men that lasted for centuries. At long last, the two races sought an end to the years of horror and bloodshed. They met on a small island in the centre of a great lake called the God's Isle. It was there they forged the pact. The first man was the illuminate the coastlands and mountains.
Rampage!
In the seven kingdoms of Westeros, the dominant religion is the faith of the Seven, first brought to its shores by the Andals some 6,000 years ago.
But there are some who still keep to the old way, worshipping the faceless gods, the children of the forest, and the first men. The old gods are countless, nameless spirits of nature. In ancient times, the children of the forest carved faces on the trunks of the weirwood trees, which became sacred symbols of their faith. In time, the first men adopted the children's gods as their own. Most castles at that time contained a god's with a weirwood or heart tree as its centre.
Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, a new religion was born in the hills of Andals. According to legend, the God of Seven revealed itself to the Andals, and the invasion of Westeros followed soon after. The Andals sailed across the sea in ships armed with adamant steel. Some warriors carved a seven-pointed star into their skin as a symbol of their new faith.
The invaders destroyed most of the weirwoods in the southern lands, slaughtered the children of the forest wherever they could find them, and conquered every kingdom of the first men, save North. In time, the faith of the Seven spread like wildfire throughout the land. The Seven is a single deity with seven aspects, each symbolizing a different area of life, though most people refer to the Seven as separate gods.
The Mother is prayed to for mercy and watches over fertility, childbirth, and peace. The Father sits in judgment over souls. The Warrior is prayed to for protection, valor, and skill in battle. The Crone is the symbol of wisdom and foresight. The Smith watches over creation and craftsmanship. The maiden symbolizes purity, love, and beauty. Finally, there is the stranger, rarely prayed to, who represents death. The faith is highly organized and deeply influential in its exclusive politics and culture, as the official religion of the monarchy. Worshippers gather in temples of the faith called sects. The seat of the faith is the great sect of Baylor. It is located in the capital city of King's Landing.
Still, in the north, where descendants of the first man worship of the old gods continues to this day, and the sacred faces of the weirwood trees keep close watch over the faithful. When Aegon the Conqueror invaded Westeros, he had 7 kingdoms to contend with. Kingdom of the North, Kingdom of the Mountain and the Vale, the Iron Islands, the Kingdom of the Rock, Kingdom of the Wood, the Stormlands, and Dawn. These regions had been established by the first men thousands of years before, in the Age of Heroes. One hero of this fabled age was Bran the Builder. Bran raised the wall and built the stronghold of Winterfell, establishing House Stark and reigning as the first king in the north. Other legends tell of the Grey King in the Iron Islands. The Grey King took a mermaid to wife and defeated Naga, the first sea dragon. House Greyjoy of Pike, current rulers of the region, claim to descend from him. House Casterly ruled the gold-rich Westerlands from their mighty seat of Casterly Rock. But their lands and power were swindled from them by the legendary trickster, Lann the Clever. The noble house of Lannister is said to have descended from him. The verdant and fertile lands of the Reach were first ruled by House Gardener, whose founder, known as Garth Greenhand, wore a crown of flowers and vines. He ruled from Highgarden, the first king of the Reach, and was said to have made the land bloom. Many noble houses trace their bloodlines back to him, including the current lords of Highgarden, House Tyrell. In the Stormlands, according to ballads of the age, a warrior named Durham fell in love with Elenai, whose father was god of the sea and mother was goddess of the wind. She gave her maidenhead to him, committing herself to a mortal life. Enraged, her parents called upon the winds and waters, destroying Darren's first keep and wiping out his wedding gift. Darren declared war on the gods and rebuilt his keep, which was also destroyed. 4 more castles were raised, each stronger than the last. All fell to the power of the god. But Darren's 7th castle, Storm's End, withstood the god's rage.
That won't happen
Darren
again.
became known as Darren Godscream and reigned as the first Storm King. There are countless other tales from the Age of Heroes, too many to count. These histories weren't recorded in a book, but passed down from generation to generation through story and song. And while some of them may be dismissed as fairy tales, every one of the 7 kingdoms is defined by them.
East of Westeros lies the Smoking Sea, where no ship dares sail. There are those who swear it to be demon-haunted, refuse to sail alone. But it was there, thousands of years ago, that a cataclysmic event occurred, destroying one of the great civilizations in history. The precise details of their origin are not known, but it is said the Valyrians were once a modest community of shepherds, tending their flocks on a small peninsula of the great eastern continent. One fateful day, in a volcanic area known as the 14 Fires, they made a shattering discovery. They were monstrous scaled creatures with massive wings, sharp claws, and fiery breath. They were also said to have a deep-rooted connection to magic. In time, the Valyrians were able to tame the beasts. Harnessing their immense power, they established a city of wonder, unlike any before or since. They became skilled at sorcery and metallurgy, creating uncommon weapons of spell-forged steel. Wielding wielding these weapons astride their dragons, the Valyrians conquered the surrounding lands and slowly expanded west. At the time, the Giscari Empire dominated much of the Great Eastern continent and tried to stop Valyria's expansion. The Giscari legions attacked the Valyrians 5 times, but could never defeat them. Finally, the Valyrians marched on their capital, Old Gis, and obliterated it, turning its streets and buildings to ash with dragon flame, and wiping the Giscari people and their culture off the face of the earth. The freehold of Valyria, as it came to be known, became the most advanced civilization in the known world, with its own language, gods, and culture. The Valyrians' reach extended far and wide, covering most of the continent. Great cities were built and roadways paved, all of which led back to Valyria. The freehold would prosper for nearly 5,000 years. But it was not to last. An event that became known only as the Doom laid waste to the Valyrians, their capital city, and its surrounding lands. The peninsula itself was shattered, becoming what is now the Smoking Sea. Every dragon was thought to be lost, as were the Valyrian spells, knowledge, and recorded history. Thus, the mighty empire collapsed. What caused this cataclysm? Some say it was a volcanic eruption. Others say the Valyrians' own sorcery got the better of them. In any event, the Doom's devastation of the Valyrian people was total, with the exception of a small rocky island in the narrow sea, Dragonstone. For it was there the Targaryens, the last of old Valyria, dwelled. They would lie in wait for another 100 years before unleashing the fury of the dragon on another continent, Westeros.
Get out of there.
The days of the Andals were numbered. One by one, their so-called kings were bending the knee or facing the wrath of Aegon Targaryen. Aegon of Old Valyria. Aegon who was blood of the dragon. After defeating the Iron Men at Harrenhal and slaying the last of the Storm Kings, Aegon and his sisters, Rhaenys and Visenya, set their sights on other continents, the gold mines on the north, and the fertile land. King Loren Lannister of the Rock and King Mern Gardener of the Reach foolishly thought their combined armies could beat back the Targaryen host. They rode forth together, their proud banners flapping in the wind, and faced off against Aegon in a vast golden field of wheat. The two kings commanded a massive force of nearly 60,000, and it appeared that they would win. Until Aegon unleashed all 3 of his dragons for the first and only time. Each beast was named after the Valyrian god of Aegon's forefather. Visenya rode Vhagar, whose fiery breath would melt armor. Rhaenys rode Meraxes, whose jaws were big enough to swallow a horse whole.
Get out of there.
Greatest of all was Balerion the Black Dread, with fire darting out and wings so huge whole towns were covered in shadow when he flew overhead. This magnificent creature was ridden by Aegon. 4,000 men were bathed in glorious dragon flames on what came to be known as the Field of Fire. King Mern was among the dead, and House Gardener died with him. His stewards, Tyrell, surrendered his ancestral stronghold of Highgarden to Aegon, and were appointed Lords Paramount of the Reach and Warden of the South. When Loren Lannister witnessed Mern's fate, he wisely bent the knee. Aegon spared Loren's life, and the Lannisters were made Lords Paramount of the Westerlands and Wardens of the West. After his triumph on the Field of Fire, Aegon's conquest was assured. In a short time, the so-called 7 kingdoms were melted down in the heat of the dragon's flame and transformed into a single realm. Aegon would forever be known as Aegon the Conqueror.
Your middle phoenix is
The ascension of Aegon Targaryen was confirmed, and the fate of the Seven Kingdoms sealed on the field of fire. Kings Loren Lannister of the Rock and Rowan Gardner of the Reach stood against Aegon's invasion. They commanded a united force of 600 banners, 5,000 mounted knights, and 50,000 men at arms. Aegon's host was vastly outnumbered, and when the army of the Two Kings charged, the invaders turned heel and ran. But Andal Might was no match for Dragonflame. When Aegon unleashed all three of his dragons, 4,000 souls were horrendously burned alive in the battlefield, King Loren among them. Realizing all hope was lost, King Loren surrendered. The Starks of Winterfell had no intention of submitting to Targaryen rule. They had reigned as kings in the north since the days of the First Men, and were determined to resist the Targaryen invaders, just as they had resisted the Andals thousands of years before. King Torrhen Stark led his army to the Red Fort just east of Riverrun, hoping to succeed where Lorne and Mern had failed. But when Torrhen saw the size of Aegon's now mighty host, along with his monstrous dragons, he knew he couldn't subject his followers to the horror of the field of fire. He bent the knee and swore fealty to Aegon, who wanted Stark to maintain the lordship of the region as Lord's Power and Wardens to the north. Without question, Torrhen Stark saved thousands of lives that day. He was ever afterwards, as the king knelt.
Aerys Targaryen was the last of his name to sit on the Iron Throne. Known far and wide as the Mad King, his was a reign of instability and terror. The Seven Kingdoms of well rid of him and his kind. Oh, he may have appeared to be a capable ruler at first, but that was due in no small part to his councillors led by the hand of King Tywin Lannister. There may be years of peace and prosperity during Aerys' reign, but it was Tywin who was really running the country as Aerys spiraled further and further into insanity. The dragon spawn were famous for losing their minds. It was the price they paid for centuries of keeping the bloodlines pure. And Aerys more than happily continued the noble sister-fucking tradition of his forefathers. As the years passed, Aerys' behavior became increasingly erratic. He cut himself so often on his Iron Throne, many referred to him as King Scab, though never to his face. It was rumored he had developed an obsession with wildfire, and was known to inflict horrific punishments on those he considered enemies, including burning them alive. As his paranoia and bloodlust grew, he had a bitter falling out with Lord Tywin, who had served the crown faithfully for 20 years. At least Tywin was able to leave the job with his life and fortunes intact. Subsequent hands of King Aerys weren't so fortunate. Then the Targaryens went too far. The Crown Prince Rhaegar abducted Lyanna Stark, daughter of Rickard Stark, the Lord of Winterfell. She was my betrothed. She was my beloved. Beautiful and spirited woman, and I loved her more than life itself. Rhaegar went south with Lyanna, hiding her away in Dorne. What harm he inflicted on the poor girl, the gods only know. Brandon Stark, Lyanna's eldest brother, was outraged. He rode to King's Landing to confront the king and demand his sister's safe return. Instead, Aerys had him executed, his father, Rickard Stark, as well. There wasn't much left to discuss after that. Aerys feared their loved ones would seek revenge for what he did. He was right.